The dusty pickup truck bounced along the forgotten back roads of West Texas. Inside, Agent Miller gripped the steering wheel, her eyes scanning the empty landscape. She was a strong leader, and her gaze missed nothing. Beside her, Reyes, sharp and quick, fiddled with a small tablet, checking maps and radio signals. His fingers flew across the screen, making sure their path was clear. In the back seat, Maria huddled, her small body shaking even with the air conditioning on. She was the witness, and she knew too much about the cartel. Her fear was a heavy blanket in the truck. Next to her sat Davis, the newest agent on the team. He kept glancing at Maria, then out the window, his hand resting near his gun. This was his first big mission, and his face showed a mix of worry and determination. Across from him, Chun sat quietly. She didn't say much, but his eyes moved constantly, watching every shadow, every distant cloud of dust. He missed nothing. Their mission was simple: get Maria to a safe house, a hidden spot deep in the desert, far from anyone who might hurt her. But they were close to the border, and the cartel's reach was long. Miller knew this journey was just the start of their fight. The sun began to dip low, painting the sky in fiery orange and purple. Soon, darkness would fall, and with it, new dangers. Begin. The truck finally slowed, turning onto a barely visible dirt track that led to a small, run-down ranch house. It stood alone, a dark shape against the last sliver of twilight, miles from anywhere. This was the safe house, old and forgotten, just a stone's throw from the border. The silence was thick, broken only by the crunch of tires on gravel and the nervous breathing of Maria. Miller killed the engine. "All right, everyone out. Stay sharp." She was the first to move, her hand already on her sidearm. The air was dry and cool, carrying the scent of dust and distant mesquite. Reyes quickly got out, his eyes scanning the horizon, while Davis helped Maria from the truck, his movements a little stiff. Chun was already moving towards the house, his quiet efficiency always impressive. Before anyone else could step inside, Miller pushed past them. "I'll go first. Clear the house." She moved like a ghost, checking every room, every closet, every possible hiding spot. Dust motes danced in the last rays of sunlight, filtering through grimy windows. She checked the locks, tested the window latches, and even peered up the chimney. No detail was too small. This wasn't just a house. It was their fortress for the night, and it had to be truly safe. Reyes followed close behind, setting up a temporary command post on the kitchen table, pulling out more gadgets. Maria stayed close to Davis, her eyes wide with fear, taking in the run-down interior that would be their only shelter from the coming night. And begin. With the house checked and declared secure by Miller, the team started to settle in for the long night. The old ranch creaked and groaned around them, sounds that made Maria jump. She sat curled on a dusty couch in the main room, clutching a tattered blanket they'd found. Her eyes darted nervously to every shadow, every sound from outside. Davis, sensing her deep fear, sat down beside her. "It's okay, Maria," he said gently, his voice soft. "You're safe here. We won't let anything happen to you." He tried to offer a small, reassuring smile, but his own worry showed in his tired eyes. Maria just nodded, too scared to speak, clutching the blanket tighter. While Davis offered comfort, Reyes was a whirlwind of quiet activity. He moved through the darkness outside the house, a small flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He planted tiny cameras in the bushes, attached sensors to the fence line, and set up tripwires near the old barn. Each device was connected to a small monitor he'd placed on the kitchen table, creating a web of unseen eyes and ears around their temporary fortress. Chun, meanwhile, was methodical, checking their weapons, making sure magazines were full, and silently watching the perimeters from the windows. Miller stood by the front door, looking out into the vast, dark emptiness of the Texas night, a silent guardian. The tension in the air was thick, a heavy weight that settled on them all. They were ready as they could be, for whatever the night might bring. And begin. The moon had risen, casting long, spooky shadows across the desert. Inside the safe house, The small generator hummed, giving them a faint light. Maria had finally drifted off to a fitful sleep, still clutching the blanket. Davis watched over her, while Chun kept his silent vigil by a window. Miller was reviewing maps with Reyes, their faces lit by the glow of the monitor Reyes had set up. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then plunged the house into complete darkness. The hum of the generator died, leaving only the sound of the wind whistling through cracks in the walls. A gasp escaped Maria's lips as she jolted awake. Reyes immediately cursed under his breath. "Generator's out," he mumbled, already fumbling for his tactical flashlight. Must have run out of gas or something. He clicked it on, the beam cutting through the inky blackness. Just as Reyes began checking his equipment, a low rumble vibrated through the ground. It was faint at first, then grew steadily louder. It was the sound of an engine, big and powerful, getting closer. Miller's head snapped up, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. "Listen," she whispered, her voice a tight thread of warning. It wasn't the familiar sound of their own pickup truck. This sound was different, heavier, and it carried a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The vehicle wasn't stopping at the main road. It was turning onto their dirt track. Their safe house wasn't safe anymore. Begin. The rumbling grew into a roar, headlights cutting through the darkness outside. Then, without warning, the night exploded. A barrage of gunfire ripped through the air, shattering windows and splintering wood. The safe house instantly became a storm of noise and flying debris. Maria screamed, a high, piercing sound that was quickly swallowed by the chaos. "Down! Everyone down!" Miller roared, her voice cutting through the din. She dropped to the floor, pulling Maria down with her. "Reyes, Davis, Chun, find cover. Return fire." Reyes, already low to the ground, aimed his rifle through a shattered window. The muzzle flashed orange in the darkness as he squeezed the trigger, sending bullets back into the night. Davis, his face pale but determined, found a spot behind a thick stone fireplace and began shooting, his shots steady and controlled. Chun, always quiet, was already positioned by a reinforced wall, firing with deadly accuracy at the shadows outside. The sound was deafening. Bullets whizzed through the air, embedding themselves in walls, furniture, and anything else in their path. The smell of gunpowder filled the small room. The cartel wasn't just probing, they were attacking with full force. It was loud, terrifying, and utterly relentless. Miller moved from position to position, checking on her team, making sure they were holding their ground. She could hear multiple weapons firing outside, and the distinct thud of heavier caliber rounds hitting the sturdy walls of the old ranch house. This was no small group. This was a full-blown assault. Begin. The agents fought with grim determination, their training kicking in even as the house trembled around them. But the cartel was relentless. Their initial burst of automatic rifle fire was soon joined by the heavier thud of something larger, shotgun blasts, and even what sounded like a 50 caliber machine gun. The old adobe walls, though thick, groaned under the impact. Dust rained from the ceiling, and cracks spread like spiderwebs across the plaster. Each hit felt like a punch to the gut. Davis, crouched behind an overturned wooden table, let out a sharp cry. A piece of flying debris, likely from a shattered window frame, had struck his arm. It was a shallow cut, but blood welled up, bright and stark against his uniform. He stared at it, his face growing paler, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to keep his rifle steady. The injury, small as it was, seemed to make his fear grow, transforming him from simply scared to truly terrified. "Davis, you okay?" Miller yelled over the din, her voice tight with concern, even as she reloaded her own weapon. "Yeah, just a scratch," he stammered, but his voice wavered. Reyes, firing steadily, cursed. "They're circling, trying to find a weak spot." The cartel seemed to have an endless supply of bullets and men. They moved with practiced precision, trying to flank the house, pushing the agents harder and harder. The ground outside vibrated with the heavy footsteps of many men, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt gunpowder. The safe house was holding, but for how much longer? Every impact on the walls felt like the house itself was slowly being chipped away. And begin. Hours crawled by, each one a slow, painful grind of gunfire and fear. The initial burst of chaos had settled into a grim rhythm. Cartel attacks, agents returning fire, brief lulls, then another wave. The house was a wreck, riddled with bullet holes, furniture splintered, and dust coating everything. Maria was huddled in a corner, sobbing quietly, too terrified to move. Miller checked their supplies. The small cooler they brought was almost empty. A few bottles of water remained, and only a couple of energy bars. "We're running low," she announced, her voice flat. The news hung heavy in the air, adding another layer of despair to their already desperate situation. But more than the dwindling supplies, a nagging question picked at Miller's mind. How? How did the cartel find them here, in this remote, supposedly secret safe house? The location was known to only a handful of people, all trusted agents. The speed and ferocity of the attack suggested they knew exactly where they were going and what to expect. Her gaze swept over her team. Reyes, still focused on his monitor, his brow furrowed. Davis, nursing his injured arm, looking increasingly anxious and jumpy. And Chun, as always, a silent shadow, his eyes unreadable. A cold wave of suspicion washed over Miller. One of them knew. One of them had to have given them up. The thought was chilling, a betrayal that cut deeper than any bullet. Who among them could it be? The seeds of doubt had been planted, and in the dark, tense confines of the besieged safe house, they began to sprout. Begin. During a brief lull in the firing, Reyes crawled to one of the shattered windows. He peered out, shining his tactical light through the gloom. His eyes narrowed. "Miller, you need to see this," he called out, his voice tight. Miller moved quickly to his side. Reyes pointed to a spot just outside, near where one of his hidden cameras had been placed. "My camera. It's smashed, but not by a stray bullet. It looks like it was stepped on, deliberately." He paused, his gaze hardening. Someone knew exactly where it was. Someone who had been outside earlier. Someone from our side. The implication hung in the air, cold and heavy. Miller's suspicion, which had been a quiet hum, now roared to life. "Are you saying someone tipped them off?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. Reyes nodded slowly. "It's the only way they could have found us so fast and known where to disable our perimeter. This wasn't random." Miller turned, her eyes sweeping over Davis, who flinched slightly under her gaze, then to Chun. Her questions were sharp, direct, cutting through the tense air. Who had access to the safe house plans? Who knew the routes? Who had reason to go outside, unsupervised? Davis stammered, trying to explain his actions earlier, his face a mixture of fear and hurt. Chun, however, remained silent. He leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his eyes darting between Miller, Reyes, and Davis. His face gave nothing away, but his steady, watchful gaze seemed to miss nothing. The fight outside was terrifying, but the growing distrust inside the house felt even more dangerous. Begin. Before the tension from Miller's questioning could fully break, a new, terrifying sound ripped through the night. The roar of an engine combined with a heavy, grinding impact. The house shuddered violently. "They're ramming the front door." Reyes yelled, his eyes glued to the monitor. The cartel had brought a vehicle, likely an armored pickup, and were using it as a battering ram. Crash! The sound of splintering wood and groaning metal echoed through the safe house. Dust and plaster rained down. Maria, who had been trying to compose herself, let out a choked cry, now completely lost to terror. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking uncontrollably. "Everyone to the front," Miller commanded, her voice like steel. She grabbed a shotgun, loading it with practiced ease. "Davis, get Maria to the back room. Stay with her. Chun, Reyes, cover me." The agents moved with desperate speed. Reyes and Chun took positions near the battered doorway, firing through gaps in the splintered wood. Each shot was aimed at the figures trying to force their way in. The front door groaned again, its frame visibly cracking. They could see flashlights and silhouettes in the darkness outside, hear shouts in Spanish. The cartel was determined to get in, and they were using every bit of their power to break through. Miller fired her shotgun, the blast echoing deafeningly in the enclosed space. The smell of gunpowder was thick, mixing with the dust. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with the fury of trapped animals. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting Maria, their one hope. They poured every bullet, every ounce of strength they had into holding that door. And begin. After repelling the ramming attack, a tense quiet fell, broken only by Maria's soft whimpers from the back room. Miller seized the moment. She walked directly to Davis, who was trying to clean the blood from his arm. Davis, Miller's voice was sharp, cutting through the strained air. Before we left, I saw you on your phone. Who were you calling? Davis flinched, his eyes widening. What? I was just calling my family, Agent Miller, telling them I was going on a long assignment. Standard procedure. His voice was shaky, a mix of fear and indignation. You can't think I would. We're compromised, Davis, Miller interrupted, her gaze unwavering. Someone knew where we were going. Someone had to, and you made a call right before we left. That's crazy. Davis's voice rose, his face flushing. I would never. I'm a DEA agent. He looked at Reyes, then Chun, hoping for support, but their faces were grim. Reyes, ever the tech-savvy one, had already pulled out his secure communication device. While Miller and Davis argued, he quickly accessed the team's internal phone logs. His fingers flew across the small screen. A moment later, his eyes narrowed. Davis, he said slowly, the number you called. It's not listed in your family contacts. It's an unlisted burner phone. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Davis stared at Reyes, then at Miller, his face draining of color. No, that's not right. I swear. His voice was a desperate plea, but the evidence, however small, had cast a dark shadow of doubt over him. The air crackled with suspicion, far more dangerous than the bullets outside. And begin. The revelation about Davis's phone call had stunned them all. Davis, still protesting his innocence, was now under a cloud of deep suspicion. As the tension thickened, Reyes pulled Miller aside, speaking in a hushed voice, almost a whisper, so only she could hear over the distant sounds of the desert night. Miller, Reyes began, his eyes grave. This thing with Davis, it got me thinking. After the camera incident, I ran a quick scan on old agency networks, looking for anything out of place related to this operation. I found something weird. A coded message, hidden deep in an archive file on an old work computer. Chin's old work computer. Miller's eyes snapped to Chun, who had been standing silently by the shattered window, his back to them, seemingly absorbed in watching the desolate landscape. The news hit her like a cold wave. First Davis, now Chun? Could be both, or was one of them trying to frame the other? A secret message? Miller asked, her voice barely audible. Reyes nodded. It looked like a dead drop. Not directly about us, but it had coded references to a package delivery near this sector. Timing matches up too. At the sound of his name, Chun slowly turned. His face was unreadable as always, but his eyes were sharp, suddenly focused on Miller. He stepped forward, his quiet voice cutting through the strained silence. I heard that. That's ridiculous. My old computer? I haven't used that in months. And a secret message? That's a setup. He denied everything, his words calm but firm, a stark contrast to Davis's frantic denials. Miller stared at him, trying to read the truth in his steady gaze. The air inside the Safehouse felt charged, heavier than the cartel's bullets. And begin. Just as the accusations and denials reached a fever pitch, a new, terrifying sound pierced the pre-dawn gloom. Not gunfire this time, but the whoosh and crackle of flames. A sickly orange glow began to filter through the shattered windows. The cartel wasn't just trying to break in, they were trying to burn them out. They're setting the house on fire, Reyes yelled, seeing the flames engulfing the dry brush near the outer walls. The smell of smoke quickly filled the air, acrid and choking. Miller's eyes hardened. The internal squabble had to stop. Now, doesn't matter who did what. We fight or we die. All of us, she barked, her voice cutting through the panic. Davis, get Maria to the cellar. Now, Reyes, Chun, find anything to put out these flames. Move. Despite the heavy cloud of suspicion hanging over them, the agents reacted instantly. Davis, pale but resolute, guided a whimpering Maria towards the small, dusty cellar entrance. Reyes grabbed the few old blankets, soaking them in the last of their dwindling water supply, while Chun used a heavy shovel to try and beat back the flames creeping towards the house. The heat was becoming unbearable, and the smoke stung their eyes. They worked as a unit, a desperate, broken team united by the immediate threat. There was no time for mistrust, no room for accusations. The cartel was pushing harder than ever, trying to drive them out into the open. The choice was clear: cooperate or be consumed by the fire and the enemy outside. The survival of Maria and their own lives depended on them putting their doubts aside, at least for a little while longer. And begin. The fight against the flames and the cartel outside was a blur of raw effort and desperation. They fought as one, their individual suspicions temporarily forgotten in the face of shared peril. Reyes, his face smudged with soot, sprayed the last of their water on a burning window frame. Chun, wielding the shovel like a weapon, knocked away burning debris. Davis, despite his injury, helped Miller push a heavy cabinet against the weakening front door. Then, as if by some miracle, the sounds of gunfire and shouting began to fade. The smell of smoke lessened. The relentless pressure from outside eased. A faint, silver-gray light began to paint the eastern sky. The first rays of the sun, weak and hesitant, crept over the horizon, chasing away the last vestiges of night. As the light grew stronger, they peered out. The landscape was scarred, blackened patches where fires had burned, scattered shell, casings glinting in the new light. And the cartel? They were gone. Their vehicles were speeding away in the distance, dark specks disappearing into the vastness of the desert. They had retreated. They had given up. A collective sigh of relief, shaky and exhausted, filled the ruined safe house. Maria, brought up from the cellar, blinked in the morning light, her eyes wide with disbelief and relief. The house was a mess, walls pockmarked, windows shattered, but it was still standing. And they were still alive. Then, a new sound, one they had longed for all night, reached their ears, the distant whir of helicopter blades. Rescue. Help was finally on its way. And begin. The drone of the helicopter grew louder, bringing with it the promise of safety and an end to their nightmare. Miller stood in the ruins of the safe house, her eyes scanning her team. The immediate danger was gone, but the wounds of the night ran deep, especially the invisible ones. The mistrust that had festered among them now resurfaced, sharper than ever in the cold light of dawn. Davis was huddled against a wall, looking small and defeated, the bandage on his arm a stark white against his dusty uniform. He wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. Reyes stood nearby, still grim-faced, wiping soot from his equipment. His gaze was fixed on Chun, who remained impassive, his expression unreadable as ever. Maria, clutching Davis's hand, looked from one agent to another, sensing the unspoken tension. Miller knew the questions had to be answered. The cartel found them because someone helped them. The unlisted phone call from Davis. The coded message on Chin's old computer. Both pieces of evidence pointed to a betrayal from within. As the helicopter landed, kicking up dust and debris, Miller looked at each of her agents, one by one. The full truth about who had helped the cartel remained a dark, unsettling secret, hidden somewhere between the lines of suspicion and denial. She hadn't seen the face of the traitor, but she knew one of them was it. The real fight, the one for truth and justice, was just beginning. It would be far more painful than the bullets and fire they had faced all night. And